Welcome to the Joy Meets Pain podcast. I'm your host, Dorcas. As a psychotherapist who has worked with children, couples, individuals, and families for decades, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say, my family is the worst, or I'm too embarrassed to talk about my family, or no family is like mine. Well, guess what, listeners? All families have ishness, foolishness, happiness, shadiness, loneliness, forgiveness, hopefulness, goodness, and the list goes on. If you come from a family and are trying to navigate your family relationships, then welcome. Please keep in mind, I am not providing therapy or medical advice. And here's a heads up. Once in a while, I will curse. So if you're looking for a clean, no foul language kind of show, this is not it.
Hello and welcome to episode 36. All right, so 2 weeks ago, I mentioned to my co-host Taffy that we should record an episode on having difficult conversations. Communication, in my experience working with couples seeking therapy, is the number one issue that brings them to therapy. Yet, communication is rarely the issue. All right, why did you leave that dirty dish in the sink? This is not the problem. So, what contributes to why conversations go south? Take a moment and think about an intense argument you had and why it went wrong. Do you recognize your part in it? Were there any issues from the past that were brought into the argument, like the dirty dish in the sink? So, building effective communication skills is not as easy as it sounds. Most of us hear words and may miss the deeper messages behind the words. Most of us react to what we hear, and yet we're not really listening to what the message is that's being delivered. Right, so my hope is by the end of this episode, you will have 7 key tools for effective communication. And yes, there are millions of resources, books, articles, podcasters, you name it, couples therapists who will give you a multitude of resources on communication. These are just the 7 key ones that I want you to look at. So, from a different perspective, right? And again, this has a lot to do with focusing on yourself, how you interact, and how you engage with others. So, grab your phone notes, a notebook, a notepad, a napkin, whatever you're writing on, and just follow along. Okay, so what happens during a conversation? All of us have defenses that we use to protect ourselves. Defenses, also known as defense mechanisms or defense processes, concepts that Sigmund Freud coined, and he did his work with the military, and so he had, a way of introducing concepts that related to the military, like defenses. All right, so what are they? They are unconscious, they are automatic behaviors, ways of coping, right, to manage anxiety, depression, envy, any other intense feelings, thoughts we may have, right? And so the ones I'm discussing today are only the ones that are considered less adaptive. There are many, but these ones, less adaptive ones, are more problematic. And the reason behind that is they protect us at a very high cost. Okay, so how do we know what that cost is? Well, we feel it. Therapists can see it, especially those who practice psychoanalysis or psychodynamic therapy. They can pick up on our defenses, right? How we engage with them, stories we may share about our relationships. So there's always a pattern that is noticeable in our behavior when interacting with people, right? And a lot of this comes from our families of origin. All right, so our close relationships are greatly impacted when these defenses are pathological. There are many, many of them. Some common ones that you are probably familiar with, like repression, suppression, dissociation, denial, humor, altruism, regression, splitting. So there are many. And the three that I am covering today are projection, introjection, and projective identification. All right, so projection. So this happens when I project onto others something within me, right? I am projecting it onto others so I can separate how I feel from myself onto others. With introjection, it's the opposite of projection, right? So I internalize what I take in from the people around me. So when projection and introjection align, this results in projective identification. All right, so when it comes to babies, it is not surprising that this is a natural process of introjecting because they are hugged and touched and cared for and fed and played with by others, right? So the positive and the negative experiences are internalized by the babies, right? So naturally, we can then see how things like neglect, abuse can also become problematic in the long run. All right, so um, what happens then when projection is benign, it is harmless, it can lead to empathy from others. So in communication, if I express something, I'm having a really hard time, people may hear and recognize, okay, she's seeking support, understanding, and so on, right? But when the projection is malignant, it breeds, according to McWilliams, dangerous misunderstanding and untold personal damage, right? Dangerous and untold personal damage. The damage done to others is untold because we don't know the extent to which our projection has affected them, right? But we can see how people around us then start to behave. So I lash out, people around me respond, and then I start to see, maybe some of their behaviors are signaling what I have projected. But obviously, only through doing work am I able to recognize this. Most of us are not aware of what we're doing because, again, these are unconscious automatic responses. And so a lot of us are not aware. And so this is partly why I'm introducing this in this topic of having difficult conversations, right? So when I project onto others, the parts of myself that are highly negative, then those on the receiving end are going to represent what I'm throwing out, right? And they may also retaliate, right? They may also resent what I throw out. And so it creates this conflictual, tense-fold interaction. So ask yourself, what aspects of myself am I projecting onto others? Same with introjection, right? When it's benign, there's no cause for concern, right? Children taken the significant behavior from people around them. And when it becomes, again, like I said before, abusive or anything like that, then it does become problematic, right? So, according to McWilliams, again, very well-known psychoanalyst in the field, uh, in her own words, she says, when we are deeply attached to people, we introject them, and their representations become a part of our identity. So, yes, it make time to simmer, to process, to recognize. I will say it again. When we are deeply attached to people, we introject them, and their representations become a part of our identity. All right, so a person who is unable to separate from these introjected objects, right? They may continue to feel diminished, unworthy, right? And if a person consistently uses introjection as a way to manage anxiety or just maintain their self-identity, right? This can lead to presentations of depressive personality. So, projective identification then, not only am I projecting onto you my inner feelings, thoughts, everything inside, right? But you then begin to experience what I project onto you, right? So how does this look in a conversation? So this is a very simple example, but I'm sure you can probably think of others or pay attention to others. Right. So if I say, I have no reason to feel as though you are constantly judging me, yet I do feel that way. Right. I have no reason to feel like you're constantly judging me, but yet I do feel that way. So in this conversation, I'm able to recognize that maybe my feelings are not justified or founded, but yet I feel that way, right? But here's a different twist where we can see the projection now causing harm, right? So if I say something like, you elderly parents think you know it all, and you're constantly judging people around you, and I don't give a damn what you think, right? So now I'm projecting what I think, what I feel, what I interpret, and I'm thrusting it out onto the elderly parents, people around me, right? So we can see how that can land negatively and also be received negatively and also be internalized by those who are listening to these words, right? So in reviewing key aspects of communication, pay attention to these three defenses: projection, introjection, and projective identification. And try to recognize when you are projecting, right? Try to recognize aspects of people you are very close to that you have internalized, that you have introjected, and how this is showing up again in your interactions with others, right? So that can show up in your friendships and your intimate relationships as well. So those three aspects, key part of communication behaviors, right? The next thing I would encourage you to pay attention to is unresolved issues. So, what is it about the people or the person I'm having a disagreement with that feels unresolved? Have I built resentment towards this person over the years for reasons I'm aware of, but maybe afraid to address? So, again, when we think about elephants in the room, is there a topic that I'm dancing around because I'm not comfortable bringing up? And because of that, I then can project how I truly feel in a conversation that has nothing to do with the issue, right? It's that elephant I'm dancing around and I'm dancing around it, and it comes up in my communication about, leaving the door open or, this other minute issue that has nothing to do with what we are discussing, right? A key communication tip is, how do I feel? So I want to be aware of how I was feeling before I interacted with the person. Had I had a rough day at work? Had I not slept well the night before? If I'm aware of these factors, then it is going to show up in my communication. So it might not make sense to try and interact when I'm already feeling crappy, right? Lack of sleep contributes to so many symptoms. And so recognizing that, you know what, maybe this is a time where I need to keep to myself, work on myself rather than force myself to engage and interact because it might not end well. And another key point that I'm sure most of you have heard so many times over, timing is everything. Timing is everything. If I had paid attention to my mood, I could have avoided this argument. If I had recognized that it was late at night or it was an hour before work, then I could have simply said, why don't we talk about this when we have more time, right? But instead of pushing the issue and the conversation because of poor timing, it ended up in an argument, right? So I always want to recognize that myself. Is if now's not a good time, let me make that point, or let me just not engage, right? Something I also want to ask myself is, do I keep rehashing the same conversations over and over and over, right? So if I recognize projection, I'm recognizing introjection, I'm recognizing projective identification, and any other immature defenses that I might be using, right? Then I want to be cognizant of when I can engage in effective communication, right? Because otherwise, arguments are going to be frequent, often, and probably around the same topics. All right. And also, always, always, always take responsibility for your part. I think this is something that's hard for many of us to do. We can blame, we can project, but when we are able to take a responsibility, own our part, that can make a difference in being able to repair those situations when we are dealing with conflict. All right, so when you think about yourself, I think ask yourself, are you frustrated with yourself? Are you disappointed with yourself? Are you struggling in some way or another? Are you unhappy with yourself and you are projecting all of this onto others, right? So I want to emphasize the significance of defenses in our interactions with others, because most of us are unaware of what we're using to cope and function to manage our anxiety and our emotions. We don't realize just how damaging they can be to our relationships, right? So, Harvard psychiatrist and psychoanalyst George Valence said, and I will quote, he has done significant work on research on defense mechanisms. And so he said the following: clinical medicine appreciates that almost half of all visits to general physicians are made by patients with functional disorders. In other words, by patients with psychological illness or problems in living who have displaced, projected, repressed, or transformed these problems into serviceable medical complaints. All right, so in closing, pay attention to yours, how you are showing up in your relationships with others. Take responsibility for your part and continue to work on yourself. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and I look forward to seeing you in episode 37. As always, stay well and stay present.
I hope this episode added something meaningful to your day or to your life. If you have a family related story, whether joyful or painful, that you would like to share, please send an email to info@joymeetspain.com or on Instagram at joymeetspainpodcast. Thank you for tuning in and for allowing me to spend this part of your day with you. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to the show. And of course, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends, family, or that cousin who always says our family is crazy. Till next time, stay well, stay kind, and stay present.